The desert of time has long covered the footprints of empires. But sometimes, when the night is still and the wind is low, the past stirs softly. Tonight, you and I will walk the marble roads of the Roman Empire, not to hear the clash of legions nor the speeches of emperors, but to listen for the quiet mysteries, the ones that never made it into the textbooks, the people who vanished into myth, into dust, into silence, and who left only questions behind. So breathe deeply. Let the night fall around you like a velvet curtain and drift gently into history. The mist hung low over the hills of northern Britannia. A soft gray blanket curled around the trees, cloaking the land in silence. It was in this silence that a legend would be born, not of triumph or conquest, but of disappearance, the kind that leaves behind more questions than answers, the kind that lingers like a whisper in the fog. Nearly 2,000 years ago, when Rome stood tall and unchallenged across the known world, the Ninth Legion, Legio Nime Hispana, was among its most revered. These soldiers had earned glory in the bloodied fields of Gaul, in the burning revolts of Hispania, and under the iron will of emperors. They were seasoned, disciplined, feared. And yet, sometime around the early 2nd century, they simply marched north and were never seen again. Their story begins in Eboracum, present-day York, where the Legion had been stationed. Tensions were rising in the northern frontier. Caledonian tribes, proud and defiant, had grown restless under Roman rule. Rumors of rebellion stirred in the wind. The Ninth was ordered to restore order, to once again assert the might of the empire. With banners flying and armor polished, they departed. 5,000 men stepping into the unknown. But they never returned. No messenger came galloping back. No reports were filed. No bodies, no weapons, no survivors. Just silence. A silence so deep that it unsettled even the most stoic officials in Rome. Whispers began to circle. What could have happened to an entire legion? Was it a devastating ambush? A betrayal from within? Or something far stranger? Centuries later, scholars and soldiers alike would try to piece together fragments. One theory suggests they were overwhelmed by the ferocity of the northern tribes. Slaughtered to the last man in a remote valley, their remains buried beneath moss and thyme. Others claim the Ninth wasn't lost in battle at all, but reassigned quietly to the eastern provinces, where they faded from record among shifting imperial politics. There are even documents, half erased and water-stained, that hint at a transfer to Germania or Parthia, never followed up. But then, there are the legends. Old, half-forgotten tales passed down in hushed voices from the borderlands. In the mists of Scotland, some still speak of armored ghosts who march through the woods on stormy nights, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. Some believe the Legion crossed into cursed land, ground protected by ancient spirits older than any empire. That they were taken, not by sword or spear, but by the land itself, swallowed whole into the other world. In 1954, a fragment of a Roman tile bearing the stamp of the Ninth was discovered near Nijmegen, in what is now the Netherlands. Some took it as evidence that the Legion had moved on. Others dismissed it, noting it could have belonged to a small detachment. Still, it offered no clear resolution, no closure, and so, the Ninth remains suspended in time, a mystery carried by wind and stone. The empire that raised them is long gone. The forests they marched into have changed, but their story, or the hole their absence left behind, remains. Perhaps they met a quiet end, buried in a valley the world has forgotten. Or perhaps they still march, somewhere beyond the veil of history, lost not only to Rome, but to memory itself. The sun was setting on the Western Roman Empire. Its light flickered, weak and uncertain, across a world that no longer feared the eagles of Rome. Roads once patrolled by proud legions had grown quiet. Marble statues were chipped by time. And in the great halls of Ravenna, The final breath of an empire would be drawn by a child. His name was Romulus Augustulus, a boy, no more than 15, crowned emperor in a time when the empire itself had little left to offer. His father, Orestes, had seized power through political maneuvering and placed his son on the throne, not for strength, but for convenience. The boy emperor was a symbol, a placeholder, a fragile mask stretched over a dying world. In 476 AD, the barbarian general Odoacer stormed Ravenna. Orestes was killed. The young emperor, untrained in war and far too young to rule, was captured. But unlike many before him, Romulus was not executed. He was spared. And then he disappeared. Odoacer, the conqueror, granted the boy his life and sent him away, to a quiet villa in Campania, it is said, with a pension and instructions to live out his days in peace. But after that moment, history falls silent. There are no letters, no sightings, no burial records, only the soft echo of a name: Romulus, the first king of Rome, and Augustulus, the little Augustus. Some believe he lived a quiet life in obscurity, tending gardens and walking the hills far from the empire's collapse. That perhaps he found peace away from the weight of titles and the burden of power. Others suggest he became a monk, seeking solace in prayer, as so many disillusioned Roman nobles did in the final years. But then, there are whispers. Letters unearthed in dusty libraries tell of a young man who fled the villa shortly after arriving, that he traveled east, perhaps to Constantinople, where the Eastern Empire still held sway, or further across the sea to lands uncharted by Rome. One theory, whispered by a 12th century monk, claimed that the boy emperor had boarded a merchant ship and vanished into the mists beyond the Adriatic. There is no tomb, no final resting place, no sculpted epitaph to mark the life of the last Western Roman emperor. Only a name and a shadow. Perhaps Romulus Augustulus was never meant to be remembered. Perhaps his story was simply the final flicker of a fading empire, too quiet to record, too fragile to endure. Or perhaps he lives on in some other way. In the stillness of forgotten villas, in the waves that lap against abandoned docks, or in the dreams of those who wonder how it all truly ended. A boy emperor, and a world unraveling around him. Together, they slipped into history's silence. The Syrian sun rose slowly over the ancient city of Palmyra. Its golden light spilled across sand-blown roads and sun-bleached stone, casting long shadows that wavered like spirits over the desert floor. Traders were already at work, their camels laden with silk, spices, scrolls. But one morning, a Roman legate named Varro prepared for a different kind of journey, one that would vanish into myth. He was not a soldier of conquest, but of knowledge. A learned man, appointed by the emperor to oversee the gathering of Eastern texts, scrolls, and rare treasures bound for the libraries of Rome. His caravan was grand and well protected. 20 carts, 24 guards, a handful of scribes, and crates of carefully sealed artifacts. They left Palmyra at dawn, their path winding through the Syrian desert toward the sea. The caravan was expected in Antioch within a week, but it never arrived. No broken wheels were found, no bodies, no scattered parchment drifting on the wind. Only silence. The kind that settles thickly, like dust, over the absence of answers. Search parties were dispatched. They followed the likely routes: dry wadis, stone-marked trails, ancient oases. A few days into the search, trackers discovered something peculiar. Deep impressions in the sand where wheels had turned suddenly, as if to change direction. Then, nothing. The trail ended abruptly, the sand undisturbed beyond it. No footsteps, no animal prints, as if the desert had swallowed them whole. Legate Varro's name would live on in fragments. In a half-finished letter discovered years later in the archives of Palmyra, written in haste. "We have seen something," he wrote. "Something that cannot be named." The rest of the parchment was torn. For generations, Bedouin tribes in the region have told stories of a hidden city buried beneath the dunes. Not built by Romans, they say, but far older. A place where time is distorted, where stars move strangely overhead, and those who wander in are never seen again. Some believe Varro's caravan found this city. Others think it found them. In later centuries, Roman scrolls would mention a loss of documents en route from Syria, but nothing more. No one was punished. No further expeditions were ordered. It was as though Rome itself chose to forget. Today, the desert remains vast and empty. Sand moves like a tide, covering and uncovering ruins, smoothing over memory. Travelers still walk the old roads, their eyes turned to the horizon, though few stray far from the known paths. They speak sometimes in hushed voices of the Roman caravan that vanished, not in battle, not by theft, but into the silence between history and legend. Perhaps they were claimed by the desert, or perhaps they chose in the end not to return. The morning of August 24th, 79 AD, began like any other in the Roman city of Pompeii. Vendors opened their stalls, ovens baked fresh bread, and children played along the paved streets. The towering shadow of Mount Vesuvius loomed nearby, quiet and familiar, a fixture of the skyline that no one feared. By midday, that peace shattered. The mountain erupted in fury, sending ash, fire, and stone high into the sky. Darkness fell in the afternoon. People ran, prayed, screamed. Roofs collapsed under the weight of falling debris. Streets filled with smoke. And then, silence. For centuries, Pompeii lay buried beneath ash and earth, perfectly preserved in death. When the city was unearthed in the 18th and 19th centuries, archaeologists were stunned by what they found. Entire villas frozen in time, tables still set for dinner, human figures curled under blankets of stone. But amidst the ruins, something curious emerged. In one district, not far from the Forum, records indicated that 32 children had lived in a villa complex. But when the site was excavated, only a handful of remains were found. The others, 24 young boys and girls, were simply missing. Their names had been listed by a wealthy widow who ran a school from her home. She described their rooms, their daily routines, even the games they played in the courtyard. Yet no trace of them has ever been found. Some suggested their bodies were lost in unexcavated areas, buried deeper or swept away by time. Others, however, noticed something stranger. A narrow tunnel, carved not by lava but by human hands, was found behind a collapsed wall in the villa's basement. It led downward, toward the city's old aqueducts, and stopped abruptly at a dead end. There were no tools, no signs of panic, just a small iron lantern, still upright, and a strip of cloth, blue and child-sized, tucked into the stones. Locals whispered that the children had somehow escaped, that the ground opened not to bury them, but to hide them. Some believed a servant led them through secret paths. Others claimed divine intervention, a goddess protecting the innocent. But then, there were the odd reports. In the years that followed, nearby villages recorded sightings of pale children wandering the hills, silent and barefoot. They would appear at twilight, stare without speaking, then vanish into the olive groves. Farmers spoke of finding strange drawings etched into cave walls, suns, birds, and swirling clouds, drawn by small hands. Of course, the official histories dismissed these as superstition, memories twisted by time and tragedy. But even today, guides at Pompeii occasionally pause by that empty villa, looking toward the ruins as the wind moves softly through the stone. And some say, if you stand very still in the late evening, you can hear laughter. Faint, distant, carried on the ash-laced breeze. Children who vanished not into fire, but into mystery. The city of Alexandria once stood as the beacon of knowledge in the ancient world. Founded by Alexander the Great and nourished by centuries of scholarship, it was home to the Great Library, a place where thousands of scrolls whispered the secrets of science, language, mathematics, and magic. And within those marble walls, Amidst the soft light of oil lamps and the scent of parchment and ink, worked a philosopher known simply as Elian. Not much is known of his origins. Some said he was Roman. Others insisted he was born to a Greek mother and an Egyptian priest. What is known is that he was brilliant, a mathematician whose theories on numbers bent the minds of his peers, and a mystic who claimed the universe spoke in patterns few could hear. Elian's lectures drew students from across the empire. He spoke not with pride, but with calm wonder, of numbers that echoed music, of mirrors that remembered, of light bending time. His scrolls were kept under lock and key, protected by scribes and guarded by silence. And then, one night, he disappeared. It was in the spring of a calm year, just after the flooding of the Nile. Elian was last seen walking into the eastern wing of the library, carrying a bundle of scrolls bound in blue linen. The guards say he greeted them politely, as always. The sun was just beginning to rise over the harbor. He never came out. When morning came, the librarian searched. The eastern wing was empty. The scrolls were never found. The chamber where he taught had grown strangely cold, and a single oil lamp, untouched, still burned on the marble floor. His quarters were undisturbed, his bed made, his sandals left neatly at the door. Rumors, as always, bloomed in the silence. Some claimed he had fled, taken by Eastern scholars or secret societies who offered him freedom beyond the empire. Others whispered of a forbidden experiment, of numbers recited in an ancient dialect, opening a doorway, not to another place, but to another kind of existence. Centuries later, a fragment of one of his writings surfaced in a monastery near Constantinople. It spoke of a mirror that does not reflect, but remembers, and of a figure stepping into it, never to return. Historians debated its meaning. A metaphor, they said. Poetic symbolism, nothing more. But there are those who still wonder, especially those who believe in places where knowledge and mystery touch. That perhaps the philosopher did not vanish, but ascended, not in a divine sense, but into something forgotten. A silence behind the veil of understanding. Today, Alexandria's original library is no more. Lost to fire and conquest, its ashes scattered to sea and wind. But sometimes, in the quiet corners of modern archives, scholars find references to Elian. Half-phrases, missing citations, drawings with no known author, as if he still walks somewhere, unseen, still teaching, not erased, but remembered by the silence he left behind. In the warm curve of the Bay of Naples, nestled among the rolling coastal hills and marble colonnades, once stood Baiae, Rome's infamous city of luxury. It was not merely a resort for the elite, but a retreat for emperors, generals, and poets. A place of opulence, where the wine flowed endlessly, the baths steamed into the night, and secrets were whispered beneath gilded ceilings. By day, it was elegant. By night, it became something else, a city of masks and shadows. And in the final days of the Republic, there lived a man named Senator Aelius Cassianus, a figure of immense wealth and quiet influence. He owned a villa that overlooked the sea, where marble steps descended directly into the water. There, beneath the stars, he would host gatherings spoken of only in rumors. It was during one such summer, on a night when the waves were calm and the breeze was sweet with myrtle and salt, that Aelius hosted what would become his final feast. A floating banquet, arranged on an ornate wooden platform tethered just off the shore. Lanterns swaying gently, musicians strumming lyres under silk canopies, wine dark as blood glistening in golden cups. The evening wore on, laughter rising with the moon. Then, as the senator stood to speak, lifting his goblet in a toast, something happened. A splash, a pause, a ripple across the water. Aelius Cassianus was gone. At first, his guests believed he had fallen, drunkenly, perhaps playfully, into the sea. But no one heard a cry. No thrashing, no voice calling from the depths. Divers searched by torchlight, but there was nothing. No body, no robe, not even a sandal. In the days that followed, Questions circled. Had he drowned? Fled? Was it staged? Planned? An escape from some political peril? Some whispered that he had discovered something during a recent Senate inquiry, a secret about Bai itself, and that he had been silenced. Others believed something older lived beneath those waters, that Bai, with its sulfur springs and volcanic caverns, was a place where the veil between worlds grew thin, that the senator had not drowned, but been taken. A local fisherman, years later, swore he saw a figure walking beneath the waves, dressed in Roman robes, hands behind his back, as if in deep thought, pacing along the sea floor as calmly as if it were his garden. Of course, such tales were dismissed, but the strange part was this. The tides around the ruins of Bai behave oddly. Even now, in modern times, sonar scans of the submerged city show corridors that lead to nowhere, echoing chambers with perfect acoustics and walls that remain unnaturally smooth, untouched by erosion. Some believe Bai was built not only as a place of pleasure, but as a door, and that perhaps, on that warm summer night, Senator Alias opened it, knowingly or not. The sea remains quiet now. Only the ruins remain, sunken beneath green-blue waves. But sometimes, at dusk, when the tide is low and the breeze is still, a strange silence settles over the shore. And in that silence, you might almost hear a voice, rich, calm, regal, offering a toast from somewhere far beneath the surface. It was the year 362 AD, and the streets of Constantinople shimmered in the early morning haze. The Eastern Roman Empire was alive with motion. Merchants unpacking goods from distant lands, priests lighting incense in towering basilicas, guards in bronze helmets patrolling beneath banners that fluttered like sails. And then, she arrived. No one knew where she came from. She spoke to no one. A woman draped in silver-gray robes, her face hidden behind a fine veil of lace and smoke-colored silk. She moved like a shadow, slow and deliberate, her sandals leaving almost no sound on the marble streets. At first, the people were curious. Whispers followed her, as did the eyes of nobles and commoners alike. Some believed she was a noblewoman in mourning, her grief so deep she had retreated into silence. Others thought she was a mystic, a seer sent by the gods. A few even feared she was a foreign spy, but she did not hide. Each morning she visited a different temple, Artemis, Cybele, even shrines long forgotten by most. She would sit silently, sometimes for hours, her hands folded over a scroll no one was permitted to see. And then she would leave, disappearing down quiet alleyways as the day grew hot. Stranger still were the coins. Left behind at each temple, beneath statues and along the altar steps, were golden coins unlike any seen before. Not Roman, not Greek, not from Parthia or Egypt. Each bore a single symbol, a pair of open eyes surrounded by stars. No emperor's face, no inscription. Priests began to speak of dreams that followed her visits, visions of tall mountains, pale moons, and music with no source. Scholars tried to follow her, but she never returned to the same path twice. Her steps defied logic. Even dogs, it was said, would not bark in her presence. Children stopped crying when she passed. And then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished. One day, she simply did not come. Her lodging, a rented room above a scribe's shop, was empty. The scroll, the coins, the veil, all gone. The bed undisturbed. The window open, though the air had been still that night. In the years that followed, stories multiplied. Some said she was a prophet from a lost city beneath the sea. Others believed she had come from the far future, a messenger who chose not to speak. One theory, more poetic than practical, claimed she was the last priestess of a forgotten goddess, walking the empire one final time before her memory faded completely from the world. Even now, in the libraries of Istanbul, archivists keep a drawing made by a temple boy who once saw her face. Just once. He said it was like moonlight, beautiful and terrifying. But no one can verify it, and no one ever saw her again. Her name was never known. But the symbol, the open eyes surrounded by stars, still appears now and then, carved into the stone of ruins far from the empire's old borders, as if the silence she left behind still listens, waiting. In the green heart of Roman Britain, where mist hangs low among rolling hills and dense groves of oak and ash, there once stood a remarkable city, Aquae Sulis. Today, it is known as Bath, famed for its hot springs and elegant stonework. But long before it became a symbol of leisure and refinement, it was a place of reverence. The Romans believed its steaming waters held divine power, a gift from the goddess Sulis Minerva, guardian of wisdom and healing. And so they came. Engineers, architects, builders, men skilled in stone and bronze. They were sent by the empire to raise temples, bathhouses, and shrines worthy of the goddess. The project was vast, expensive, and unusually swift. Locals marveled at the efficiency. Structures rose where there had once been wild thickets. Columns were carved with impossible precision. Aqueducts flowed with flawless design. Then, it all stopped. One morning, the foreman did not appear for roll call. His tools were found neatly arranged on a wooden bench. The next day, 2 masons failed to return from their night shift. By the end of the week, the entire core team of builders, 17 men in total, had disappeared. No signs of struggle, no blood, no theft. Their wages were untouched, their lodgings undisturbed. Some left meals half-eaten on their plates. One man's cloak was still drying by the fire. The remaining workers were terrified. Some fled south, speaking of strange lights in the woods. Others claimed to hear distant humming in the hills, a low vibration that echoed through the stone. The project halted and never fully resumed. Roman officials launched an inquiry, but no conclusions were drawn. The report was short, formal, and cold. Laborers presumed lost. Work incomplete. The incident was quietly buried in bureaucratic archives, but years later, local druids told their own version. They believed the springs of Aquae Sulis sat upon a threshold, a place where the boundary between the human and the divine was thin. That the builders, by disturbing the ancient ground with chisels and hammers, had awoken something. Not with anger, but with purpose. One inscription, found behind a wall decades later, offered a final clue. Scratched in Latin by an unsteady hand, it read, "We are summoned, do not follow." The wall had no door behind it, only soil. To this day, visitors to Bath speak of an odd calm near the oldest corners of the ruins. Some say they feel watched, not with malice, but with a kind of ancient curiosity. Others have heard whispers, soft and musical, drifting up through the steam. And in the museum archives, sealed behind glass, sits a chisel, found beneath the floor of the temple, engraved with 17 marks. No one knows who made them, or why. The builders of Aquae Sulis were among the most talented of their time. But perhaps their hands were not taken, but chosen. Far to the east of Rome's golden palaces and senatorial courts, beyond the blue curve of the Mediterranean, the city of Antioch rested like a jewel among hills. Known as the Queen of the East, it shimmered with temples and gardens, aqueducts and tiled villas. The Orontes River wound through its heart like a silver ribbon, and the air often carried the scent of citrus, basil, and warm stone. It was in this city, beneath domed roofs and quiet cloisters, that a boy named Lucian Aurelian was born. He was the youngest son of a patrician family, connected, if quietly, to the imperial bloodline. Lucian was not raised for war, nor pushed into politics. Instead, his early years were shaped by curiosity. His tutors often said the boy read as if he were remembering something he'd forgotten long ago. He favored astronomy and poetry, and would often sneak onto the upper terraces of the villa just to watch the stars rise in silence. But he was not a recluse. Those who met him described a gentle confidence, a kindness in his eyes, and a voice that always seemed calm, even when others lost their temper or pride. Servants adored him. Scholars debated with him. Even animals seemed to gather near. As he approached his 16th birthday, his name began to echo beyond Antioch. Envoys from Constantinople arrived. His father began writing letters in cipher. Distant cousins of the emperor visited more frequently. Whispers began to circle. Lucian would soon be chosen, groomed as a new kind of heir, not one of bloodlust and conquest, but of balance, intellect, and peace. And so, a ceremony was arranged. It would be held at the family estate just outside the city. Laurel wreaths were woven. Statues were cleaned. A silk robe, embroidered with twin phoenixes in gold thread, was made especially for the occasion. Musicians traveled from Ephesus, dancers from Rhodes. The villa gleamed in preparation. But when dawn arrived, Lucian was nowhere to be found. His bedroom was untouched. The oil lamp beside his bed had burned down to its final flicker. A scroll of translated Sapphic poetry lay open on his desk, beside a half-eaten fig and a single glass of untouched wine. His slippers were still at the door. The window stood open, though there had been no breeze that night. Guards swore they had seen nothing. Dogs did not bark. Horses did not stir. No witness heard a voice, a cry, or even footsteps. Panic spread quietly, contained within the marble halls of the family's villa. A missing heir was dangerous, not only for the family, but for the empire. Messengers were sent in secret. Gates were locked. Coins were offered for information. Search parties combed the countryside. Nothing. For weeks they searched, down every winding road, along the riverbanks, through hidden tunnels beneath the city. They found no footprints, no belongings, no trace. Only silence. The imperial court made no public mention. Officially, there had been no heir, no ceremony, no disappearance. But in Antioch, people remembered. And in the hills beyond the city, the stories began. Shepherds spoke of a boy in silk garments walking the ridge at twilight. Tall, barefoot, his hair pale in the moonlight. He did not speak. He did not run. He simply stood, staring down at the valley as if waiting for something, or remembering it. One shepherd, an old man with a limp, claimed the boy helped him after he had fallen on the rocks. The boy said only one thing before vanishing. There is no crown heavier than silence. He offered no name. But his eyes, the man said, were like starlight on water, familiar and unblinking. Another account came from a monk traveling from Cappadocia. He claimed to have met the boy in a ruined chapel hidden in the woods. They spoke for hours, not of politics, but of the soul and of the stars. When the monk woke the next morning, the boy was gone. But carved into the stone beside where he had sat was a single line in Greek. I was not taken, I walked. Was it Lucian? Or a spirit conjured by grief and guilt? Centuries passed. The empire would fall, rise, and fracture again. Antioch would burn, be rebuilt, and fade. But in the older neighborhoods, where stones remember more than people, the story of the lost heir still lingers. In a grove east of the city, where wild olive trees twist into strange shapes, sits a crumbling fountain, its basin long dry. No one knows who built it, but carved around its rim are 17 lines of verse, too weathered to fully read. Only the final line remains. The empire lives wherever he walks. Some say Lucian became a wanderer, blessed or cursed with life beyond the natural span. That he walks still, somewhere between this world and whatever waits beyond. A ruler without throne, a prince without a court. Watching, remembering, and perhaps waiting for an empire that once believed in wisdom to believe again. In the very heart of ancient Rome, nestled between the bustle of the Forum and the murmurs of marble-clad senators, stood one of the oldest temples in the empire, the Temple of Janus. It was simple in design, yet powerful in presence. Janus, the god of beginnings and endings, of gates and transitions, was unlike any other deity in the Roman pantheon. He had two faces, one looking forward, one back. And so, too, did his temple reflect duality. It was open in times of war, closed in times of peace, a gate to movement and stillness both. But there was something else about the temple, something rarely spoken of, even in whispers. Behind the visible altar, behind the familiar columns and ceremonial bronze doors, there was said to be another chamber, a sealed inner sanctum, one that only a select few priests could access. It was not recorded in public records. It was not shown on temple diagrams. It existed in stories passed between generations of caretakers, always with the same warning. Do not enter alone. And yet, someone did. In the final days of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, as power shifted and paranoia bloomed within the city's walls, a senior priest named Marcus Arrianus was appointed as caretaker of the temple. He was known for his devotion, his orderliness, and his unnerving calm. On a cold morning in late autumn, Marcus arrived before dawn to open the temple for a rare private ceremony. The other acolytes waited outside, preparing incense. But Marcus never emerged. At first, they thought he had taken ill, or simply lost track of time in prayer. When they entered the main hall, it was empty. The incense bowl was untouched. The door to the inner sanctum, a smooth slab of polished black stone, stood slightly ajar. Inside, there was nothing. No statue, no altar, no priest. The room was bare, its walls without inscription. Only a faint scent lingered in the air. Myrrh, ash, and something colder. On the floor, a perfect circle had been drawn in chalk, still intact, untouched by footsteps. At the center lay Marcus's ceremonial staff, its bronze tip still warm to the touch. No one saw him again. No sign of struggle, no explanation. The temple was closed for a week, then reopened. No mention was made. But from that day forward, the inner door was sealed permanently with lead and bronze, and the chamber forgotten. Centuries later, during the early medieval period, an excavation beneath the forum uncovered an unusual inscription carved into the foundation stones of what was once the Temple of Janus. The Latin was clear, deliberate. It read, "To open the gate is to choose the path, but not all paths return." Scholars debated the meaning. Some said it was metaphor, for life, for faith, for the empire itself. Others believed it was a warning, a riddle, a memory. And perhaps it was all of these things, because Janus was not just the god of doors. He was the guardian of thresholds, those strange, silent spaces between what was and what might be. So maybe, when Marcus Arrianus stepped into that chamber, he did not vanish. Maybe he simply moved forward, into something we cannot name, into silence, into possibility. And perhaps that is where all those who vanished from Rome truly went. Not into death, but into the quiet folds of time. Into the spaces between pages, between pillars, between dreams. Waiting, watching, remembered only by the ruins, and by those who still listen. And now the winds of time grow still once more. The empire sleeps, as do the voices of those lost to its shadows. Perhaps their stories were never meant to be solved. Perhaps they were offerings, mysteries to lull the restless mind. So let your breath slow, let your thoughts drift, and may the forgotten ghosts of Rome watch quietly as you dream.